Hey guys, welcome to the Not Bad Better podcast. We're your hosts, Luke and Luke.
On this podcast, we interview people much smarter than us and ask questions about how they've created a life that they love.
Follow along with us weekly as we learn about strategies that we can use to improve our own lives.
We hope this is beneficial. We aim for this to be applicable in your own life so that you can grow with us. Wow,
What an intro.
what an intro.
That's how we're starting them still.
Perfect.
Today we are here with my dear father, I'll call you Pete today.
That's a good idea.
That's what I call you all the time. Not out of lack of love like some might, out of pure love. How are you, Dad?
I'm going really well. Yeah.
That's good.
Glad you boys got up early this morning.
Yeah, it's
It was an effort at
8:04, which no one can see.
5:30 a.m. I hear Lukey's alarm go off and I hear him rolling out of bed and then I get a message from him at 5:45. All right, we're leaving at 6:15.
We had discussed
out
the
to
morning
6:30.
before 6 o'clock departure, and then I looked at maps, which I do most mornings when I have to go somewhere, and there was clear traffic. I said 6:15, and then I got out of the shower at 6:15, and then had a coffee, and we were good to go.
And you were still here early.
Yeah, we were aiming to be set up by 7:30, but we won't say that.
We'll pretend that wasn't the plan.
Yeah, so Dad is currently a leadership and management consultant for his own company, Reflect Consulting. That's coming up on 20 years
Yeah.
this year.
Next year.
Next year.
Yep.
I was-
2003.
Yep. And prior to that, there was some work as a outdoor education teacher, rafting guide, all of the fun,
Yeah.
all of the cool teacher things. I'm going to put them in, and I think you still embody that. Certainly as a dad, you embody that. There was a building company in there for a while as well, which is still going strong.
Yep.
But you're not just a man that works, so we'll get into some other stuff as well. But do you want to give us a brief bio of the last 35 years?
Yeah, or maybe 51.
I was being very generous.
Yeah, well, if you're 19 and I was still 35, we'd have some different discussions, I'm sure.
They'd be different, that's for sure.
Yeah, so growing up was eastern suburbs, Melbourne. Number 4 of 5 kids to Jean and Alan. They met at Teachers College and moved around the state a bit because when Dad first got his job, you had to go where you were told. They went to a little country town of Arnold out in the wheat and sheep belt. And then they moved back to Melbourne and settled in a house that they lived in together for the next 46 years before Dad died. And I was part of the Smith clan that grew up in Macefield Avenue in Murrelbark, just up the road from the local footy ground, which meant we had an extended backyard. And life consisted of, kinder and then walking to school, something that some people forget that we can do. Followed the 3 brothers to the local primary school, and they all went off to the tech school, and I decided to go to the high school after that. Little sister came along 4.5 years after me, so Mum finally got a little girl. We were pretty good mates, Jen and I, and then from year 10 I switched schools. I sort of got this inkling that maybe my environment wasn't doing the best for me at school, and I think thinking about this morning, one of the very fortunate parts of my growing up was having 3 older brothers, because you got a window into what was next in life, and I saw them going off and working and doing further study, and I got this idea that maybe you needed better marks than I was going to get. So I had this chat with Mum and Dad partway through year 10 that said, I don't know, that used to be called the VCE back then, not whatever it is. No, HSC back then, high
It's
school
VCE
certificate.
now,
VCE now. I said, I don't think I'm going to do all that well where I am. And so year 11 and 12, I jumped on the train at the 7:11 a.m. train from Murrelbark to to Laburnum, and I went to Box Hill High for year 11 and 12, and they were 2 awesome years. Met some fantastic people there, and did turn the results around, which was the intended thing. I met some great people and had a good time there. Took a gap year after high school. It wasn't all that common back then. Had met some people in the States who said, if you want to come, you can, come and stay with us. And so out in the middle of Texas on a ranch as a base that was 1990. That was a terrific year too. Just the first time I'd been on a plane, first time I'd been out of the country, and I went with a few $1,000s in travellers' checks and a return airfare, and spent the summer over there. Worked on some camps while I was there, travelled around, met some other people. Had a fantastic time. Came back, and I guess the work journey started a little bit before all of that in terms of when I was 15, I think I was 14 or 15, I went on a bushwalk one day. Part of the story, I guess, that's important to understand the growing up bit was, I talked about school. So Monday to Friday was pretty straightforward. Saturday was always sport. Our sport was determined a bit by what happened on Sunday. Dad grew up playing cricket and footy. He always lamented the fact that the 3 of us boys played soccer, and Gary, my oldest brother, played tennis. He's a very good tennis player, but footy down the road, which would have been very easy, was Sundays. But Sunday for Mum and Dad was church, hard pews, cold in winter, stinking hot in summer. Shout out to those who are listening from Moorall Park Baptist days, and and I'd been on a bushwalk. They had a fantastic youth program there, and I was 14, snuck into this program. I think you had to be 15 at the time, but it was coming up soon, and it was Easter, and we walked in the Victorian High Country into a place called Lake Tarley Khan, and I loved it. And I guess the other part of growing up was, Dad had holidays, school holidays, and whilst we had enough money, there was never a lot of money, but somehow Mum and Dad managed the budget, and we'd hook the caravan on and go away just about every holidays. And so we'd holiday in Bright in the winter, and we'd go up to the Mount Buffalo and places like that and roll around in the snow and toboggan and things. And so I've always loved the mountains, and the bushwalking part, 4 days I think it was, put a backpack on and you've got everything you need. I loved that. And in discussions about what I might do post high school, I always thought I'd love to, work in school camps or something like that, outdoors. And Dad was pretty smart, and he said, well, a teaching degree is not a bad thing to have behind you if you're going to, some of your work's going to be with kids and things like that. So off to Melbourne Uni. I just got back from a year of travelling and thought, I reckon English would be a fantastic thing to have if ever I want to travel again, because I love travelling. Being able to teach English would be great. So I enrolled stupidly in that. My bent was always business, so it was a commerce degree at Melbourne Uni. They just amalgamated with the Teachers College, and so you could mix between the two faculties. So I'd spend time in the law library. That was the thing I really loved at high school was law, but I didn't get the marks, Morrison, for that. You're much smarter than me, or maybe more disciplined. And so I'd spend time between the law library and the business faculty and over studying things like the Agamemnon, which is this Greek trilogy, and I had no clue. I just had simply no clue about all of that. And
that's where I get it from.
Yeah, so partway through my first year, I got a bit of course advice, and a withdrawal was much better than a fail. So it would have been about this time of year, July or August, when I went and saw a course advisor and said, this 1 year is about to be written off. Is there anything I can do? And they said, yeah, look, you won't get charged your HECS if you, I think we were about very early in that whole HECS journey. If you withdraw, I said, well, what can I do now? You know, second semester was underway and all that sort of stuff. And the lady who gave me the course advice said, oh, there's these little short units you can do that give you credit points. And they just happen to be bushwalking, kayaking and rock climbing. Thank you, Melbourne University. And so I enrolled in these 3-4 day programs. And on the second of those, which was the kayaking one, I bumped into, the lecturer on there, Ian Webster, who had a massive influence in I guess, where my career went. He said, are you enrolled in this full time? I said, what full time? He said, you know, you can do they called it a, what did they call it? A method, that's right. You had these methods of teaching, right? You can do a method in outdoor education. I said, you're kidding me. Because I'd never found it when I was looking at the course guides or what have you. So I then had, I crammed 4 years of that into the next 3, which meant that I spent a whole heap of time up on the Bogong High Plains in winter, snow touring and camping and things out in the snow, you know. So basically cross-country skiing or bushwalking with skis on, which was fantastic. Kayaking, bushwalking, all of those things that I loved, and came out pretty well qualified, but also had the sort of the business side of things. And then I guess another turning point was, I think I was in third year, so I was 21 anyway, and I met this gorgeous young PE teaching student, also met on a bushwalk, the lovely Mandy, who's your mother, Luke.
Just to confirm.
Just to confirm it wasn't someone else.
Yeah, and 30 years later, still fantastic friends, and when we graduated at the same time, we sort of looked at things and said, what should we do with life, and so that began a process where she got a job teaching and I got a job teaching, but I also over the next 10 years did a lot of freelance work and mainly taught part-time. First couple of years was full-time just to get some cash in the bank. We got married in our first year out of uni. We came back from our honeymoon with $9 and something in the bank. I remember because we needed petrol for the car, and the ATM would only give you $10 as a minimum, and it wasn't there. So luckily I had this. There was no credit cards back in the day, or we didn't have one anyway. But we had this tin that I used to put my change in, and that had come from our place to the place we were renting. Thanks again, Mum and Dad and Warren and Lois, for moving us while we were away, moving our stuff into this little rented house, and we tipped that out, and there was $35 in it or something. So we put petrol in the car and got us through till Wednesday, whenever we got paid. And then that journey of working with people primarily in the outdoors led to getting a rafting qualification and being a rafting guide. Shout out to Roger Peggy, the best boss I've ever had. We'll get on to some of the things around leadership and work.
Better than having yourself as a boss, even.
Heaps better. Yeah, he's heaps smarter. But yeah, I worked for Roger for a number of years on the various Victorian rivers. Loved the Midamida River. And also taught skiing at Mount Buller for a few seasons. And I was just up there on the weekend, on Saturday. Beautiful place, love it. Very nostalgic when I go up there. And then a bit of a turning point about the time you were born, Luke, actually. Got invited to apply for a business manager's job, which was a little bit out of nowhere. Said to them, look, you actually don't want me for a range of reasons. Basically no experience in that field. But they encouraged me to apply. I applied, didn't get the job, knew I wouldn't. And they gave me the same reasons that I gave them at the interview for not getting the job. But it sort of said to me, will this body survive, till 60 odd or whatever in the outdoors? And it's built a little more for comfort than for speed. and endurance. And so I went back and did some further study, and that was a bit of a turning point in where things ended up now. So that was. You were 20. When were you born? 2002. So it might have been about 2000, somewhere around there. I think that was the last. Yeah, it was during the last season that I taught at Bulla. 2020 that I started. Halfway through that, I started in a grad cert for accounting and finance. I was heading down that road, and partway through that realised that I wasn't going to be an accountant per se. Although I understood finance, I didn't see myself sitting at a desk and all that sort of thing. And then switched across and did an MBA, and that was fantastic. It was partway through that actually that I got to a couple of the subjects that these guys called Tree Hugging 1 and Tree Hugging 2. So there was, in the first year of this particular course, you do finance, marketing, operations, and the people thing, right, which was called leading, following, and team dynamics. That was the first year, and so the guys, and you'd work a lot in syndicate groups, and you'd be familiar with this. So I worked in a group with a guy who was a marketing executive at Mars, a guy that worked for HP, just when Compaq and HP had combined, and he was a senior manager for the Asia Pacific region, so he was going through that. There was another fellow who worked for one of the pharmaceutical companies as an operations guy, and we had a bean counter, a really smart guy who worked for a large electrical company, and then there was me, this kind of outdoor guy who turned up, and so when we did these group assignments and things, they'd carry me with the marketing stuff, and the spreadsheets that Steve Drummer used to put together were legendary for the finance stuff. And we'd get to the tree hugging, and they'd sort of switch off, and I'd switch on. Hang on a minute, this is what it's about. This is people, And I reflect now, and I think a lot of what I did for work in the outdoors, and we'll get to what I do now, has really been around that people piece for me. I just like, I find that I like working with people. I genuinely like people, and I like seeing the lights go on. So that was kind of that uni and study journey. Took a big punt in 2003 to hang the shingle out and say, here's a little consulting firm. And what had happened during that MBA time is I'd been asked to do a few things here and there, and I thought, maybe there's an opportunity here to extend that, and we may get to how it turned from potential silly idea and financial failure to something that has paid your school fees and given you a few opportunities, which is all part of the plan. And then from there, life's been, in terms of working life, mainly now dealing with people, but in a different field, helping them initially more so around their leadership generally, and increasingly in the safety space, particularly in industries where fatalities are potential if not managed, if the environment's not managed correctly. And I guess to complete some of that story, some fantastic mates along the way, guys that have, just shared interest, walked life's journey. We've had, births, deaths, marriages, breakups, fair share of great times and some pretty hard ones in there. I lost a cousin to suicide just before you were born, Luke. In fact, your middle name is a tribute to him. Fantastic. And and through that, we might or might not get to that, a faith journey that's held that together from, for me, or maybe shaped it first and then held it together and sustained it along the way. And you mentioned the building company. So in 2008, had a mate who's a builder, a good mate of mine, who just asked me if I'd join him in starting a building company. In fact, his words were, we just had dinner, I was sitting at his parents' place, he was there with his wife, he said, Smithy, I've been thinking, this classic Paul Anderson. He said, you know business, I know building, what do you reckon?
Nice.
That was it. So we had a bit of a chat and formed up a bit of a plan, far more of a plan for that business than for the consulting one. And yeah, we commenced in 2008. In 2016, we packed up the family and did a lap of the country, best year of my life. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I exited the business, sold my half of the business to Paul. And interestingly, he did a similar thing, went on a journey with his family, and now Adam, who was our foreman at the time, owns the company. It's still going strong. And it's a fantastic little building company that does great work.
Mm-hmm. If you want a house built, go to Integra.
Integra Homes, yeah.
That's it.
Call Clemo. He'll look after you.
Well, his turn to get in a caravan and go next.
He did, but he came back.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that was good. Thanks. We'll see you next week. So we've had a little bit of a chat pre-sitting down about what we wanted to kind of target today, I think. And I think the underlying theme of Pete Smith bio is people. Yep. So we might get into that a bit, I think. So obviously work is surrounded by people for you, and often when people ask me what does your dad do for work, the comedic answer is he makes sure people don't die, basically. So, and that's not, that involves connecting with people. And we had a chat the other day about, you can sit 30 people down in a room before they go out to work at 5 a.m. and have a briefing with them. But if you're just going to throw some theory at them and not give them a practical application that they connect with, it's not going to achieve anything. I think a lot of people find it difficult to connect people to a message. And I've always found that you're pretty good at that, and that's probably your, in your words, key offering as a small consulting firm starting out. That's kind of, and it's continued through as something that you offer pretty readily. So how important is that connection for you with people, and how do you maintain that through 20 years of working?
Yeah.
And then before that as well, I mean, in the outdoors it's probably slightly more relaxed. But what are some, I guess, practical things that you do, and you can go off on that for as long as you need to, I think.
Well, maybe just before we do, to paint the picture.
Yep.
I ran into a fella in, it might have been 2005, who was particularly busy at the time, and asked if I'd help him to rewrite a leadership program that he was working on for a company called Thiess, or Thiess, depending on which part of Australia you come from. And they're a large company that does construction work, that does civil work, and also has some mining operations. And so I thought that this was going to be a kind of a 1 week rewrite the program, hand it over. And I did that work, and he said, would you come and help run the program with me? In fact, he double booked himself at the time. So could I go and do that? And then whatever he was doing fell through, and the two of us went and ran this program. It's up in the Central Coast in New South Wales, and they brought in a dozen frontline leaders. So these are supervisors on building sites from Canberra, on a road project from the Central Coast, and out of the Hunter Valley coal mines. And in fact, one of the guys that was on that program, I'm still in touch with. The very first real work that I ever did in this sort of space, and then I subcontracted to him until the end of 2011, and during that time, I got a lot of exposure to parts of the world that I had no idea about. In fact, in that very first program, I remember saying to the building guys, some of my good mates were builders and sparkies and whatever, and I worked for those guys during uni to put myself through. And so I said to the construction guys, I kind of understand what you do, you know. And the civil guys, everyone's driven past a road project or you had to slow down to 40, and if you've got a little bit of inquisition about you, you look, how are they building that thing, you know? So we've seen, bridges being built and stuff. So I've got a bit of an idea about your world. But the mining guys, I had almost no idea about. So we're in Gippsland right now, and if you drive to the Midamita River, you go through the Latrobe Valley, and you've got these big holes in the ground on the side. And the only thing that I remember about them was I was probably driving a 22-seater bus with 4 rafts on a big trailer behind us, and had a bunch of people on a weekend or, whatever it might be, a corporate adventure group. Excuse me. So that's about all I knew of mining. And I said that to these guys. But part of the follow-up to this program was to provide some coaching, which meant going into their world. And I've been doing that ever since. So we'd drive down the highway and see this hole in the ground, and I said to these guys, Anyway, so increasingly I find myself coaching and dealing with these guys from mining. And over the journey, I've just got to know a number of them, to enjoy them, and to find out that whether you are running a coffee shop or a coal mine or anything in between, one of your big challenges is people. And you can have the best systems in the world, and you'll have people that can stuff that up, either deliberately, if they don't like you, or unintentionally, because maybe you haven't explained yourself clearly or trained them well or whatever it might be. So, that journey into that world has led us to a point now where we run a global leadership program for Glencore, who are a big multinational, multi-commodity sort of end-to-end mining company that provide, pretty much anything you can put on a boat, and increasingly, the metals and things that you need for this new world that we live in, mobile phones and electric cars and all that sort of stuff. But they do it in some environments that are very challenging, and some countries that have some, I guess they don't have the luxuries or the sort of legal frameworks that we have here. And so coming from working with the guys in Australia and seeing some good practice, not always best practice, but seeing good, solid practice, and then going to work with some of these other guys and sharing that understanding with them and helping them, and in fact learning from them too, because whether you're in South America, Africa, parts of Europe, there's some real pockets of excellence in those places too. So, again, I'm finding myself in this place where we're trying to share the best of what we're seeing, and to help people connect with each other around that. That's essentially what we're doing now, and on the back of a pretty strong push to do everything we can to eliminate fatalities and serious incidents from a workforce of 150,000 in Glencore's case, plus contractors and what have you. So it's big. And then some other clients as well. But I guess just to keep it simple, most of our work has been, in and around that business over the last sort of 15 years or so, I guess. So how then do you take that connection piece and make it equally as applicable for a guy who's got a job? I'm going to tell a particular story about someone, true story, who used to pick cabbages. And if you pick cabbages, you're paid minimum wage. And you're out in the heat or you're out in the wet. And this particular guy applied for and got a job in the mining industry 25 years ago. He was young, he had 3 kids, got another one now, and they were scratching around. And he got a job, and he went to work every day in the mines, and it was his ticket to his kids' opportunity. He's got a house by the beach now, a little holiday shack. He still lives simply, but he's got opportunities for his kids. How do you take a message for someone like that who's just become, after 15 years, I think it was, working in a small team to then leading them? So he's been in it. He's been doing all the things that those guys do, and all of a sudden now he's got to lead this team. And he and 3 others like him were my first foray into the Glencore world. I coached them on frontline leadership, and a lot of that had to do with people skills. They taught me the technical aspects. We talked through the people aspects, and they're all 4 of them great people in their own right, and 3 in particular have gone on to additional steps in their career. But then also I might sit in a boardroom with an executive team, or with the head of all the operations or whatever it might be, and talk to them about how we get messages across and connect with people. And then in this last project, which is the sort of global leadership piece, how do we get a message? In fact, I've got a meeting later today that translates not only in Australian mining context, but maybe in a metal processing, like a smelter in somewhere like Kazakhstan. And I spent some time there a few weeks back, and how do we get that across there? Post-Soviet era thinking, modern technologies and things available, large scale, good support systems. How do we translate to the people on the ground there? Is that different to South America? And I guess for me, it's about joining the dots. And when people ask me what I do for a job, I've got one of 2 answers. If it's at the barbecue and I don't feel like, I want to go into too much about work, so we do training work. People go, oh, okay. Or if someone prods a bit more, I say often we get paid for joining the dots. And I should say that none of this is possible without our team. We've got a really good team of people, and some guys, 3 in particular, 4, I guess, for length of time, that we've worked really closely together. Total trust, understand their, the way that we operate. Each of us is different. We bring our own personalities to things. But our opportunities, I couldn't have done any of that without the support and the backing of those guys. So, joining the dots in terms of taking the theory and making it practical. I think that's part of that. And I don't think you can do that unless you've got the trust of people and the relationship that enables you to do that.
Yeah, and I think anyone that's been in a classroom or in a learning sense knows that dots get joined for people completely differently. Depending on what you're teaching and where it's going, sort of. And especially for you, there's, like you were saying, there's people that are going in there and doing the bottom of the food chain sort of work, and there's people that are high level executives, and you might be pushing the same underlying message across that span of jobs.
Yeah, and just quickly on that, those senior guys, the really good ones, know that the frontline ones who you described, not me, as the bottom of the food chain, those guys, so the senior execs will say that not only is the hardest job but the most important job, those frontline guys, because they're instructing people in potentially hazardous work, in changing environments, and if you think you've got a room full of 15 people or 20 people in a nice controlled environment, like a classroom going way back, or in a conference room or something like that, try 75 people at 5:45 in the morning, and in the middle of an industrial dispute or something like that, and these frontline guys have got some super challenges, and if you're in an open cut mining sense, most of those 75 people are going to go and sit in a piece of machinery by themselves for the next 12 hours, and your ability to influence those people across that 12 hours is very limited by proximity. You've got a two-way radio, or you're going to stop the operations to get them to stop, to come stand on the ground, have a discussion with you. So those influencing skills, particularly around that start of shift time and what have you, and the relationship stuff's really hard there. The good execs would say, look, we put a budget together, we make sure we've got a health and safety management plan in place, we check things, we balance them out, we manage people, all that sort of stuff. But those frontline guys have got a super hard job. Yeah.
Just quickly, practically, joining the dots for us.
Yep.
How do you interact? Is there a difference in your interactions with someone that is, say, a senior executive at Glencore and one of those frontline workers? Like, do you change how you interact with them? Are there techniques you use when you're sending the same message?
I don't ever like to think of our communication with people as technique. So I think the short answer would be no. I think I am who I am.
Yep.
And that I would like to think that if I'm speaking to a general manager or a director or something like that, that maybe the things we talk about are broader or more strategic, or more from a planning perspective or whatever. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think I would be the same me with someone who's, for example, I spent quite a bit of time underground coaching supervisors who, it's hard to paint a picture, would get to work before 5 a.m, have a couple of meetings with other groups and things to plan the day. They would have a large muster with everybody that's going underground that day. Let's call it, 100 and something people that would go underground, and then get into a transport of sorts. It might be a cage that goes underground, might be a vehicle that goes, and then they got a team of 6 or 7 people, and they've got to get coal out of the ground. They've got to repair machinery. They've got to, there's a whole heap of different teams that work underground, and I would hope that if I'm going to spend, and I have, many times spent 12 or however many hours underground with those guys, walking alongside them, because everything, once you underground there, you're walking, and I would hope that I would be the same me with them, and in each case, it would be about asking questions around what are we doing here, and are there ways to do that better, and I've asked for that sort of technical understanding from a frontline leader, maybe just as often as I have in a meeting where I don't understand something that a group of operations managers are talking about. I'll ask that, and then I'll try and think about it, and if there's something that we can offer that we've seen somewhere else, or so I think I wouldn't have a different technique, but I think the things we talk about are sometimes slightly different.
Yeah, I get that.
Only thing that changes is the pair of boots that you're wearing.
Well, often not. Yeah, I think once you step onto an operational mine site, you're in high vis and boots and things.
Yep.
And the occasions in my work where it's not that might be 20% of the time, and then 80% of the time if I'm face to face with people. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's hard hat and steel caps and things like that. And it might seem odd, but the executives on those sites are dressed that way too, because they intend to understand their business and stay connected to their people, the good ones in particular.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we might take a little bit of a shift, but I think can sort of follow that through line of teaching through connection, I'd probably say. How do you teach someone that's never skied before to ski and get across your 3 key messages of your first couple of days of skiing, when someone that we know pretty well is deathly terrified of skiing for the first couple of times?
Yep.
When you're in that situation, which you did for a profession for quite some time.
Yep.
What are, obviously there's differences than in a job setting or work setting. What's going through your process of maybe a little bit of context? I think you're very good at taking a big concept and breaking it down into actionable chunks.
Yep.
And for me, that's you sitting behind my golf swing and saying you're not coming round enough when you swing your driver. You know,
Yep.
Wrist goes over, swing round, and then the next one, sit behind. Okay, you did that well. Do this. So let's take skiing as an example. What's your process for picking out from a jumble of information the things that are going to improve someone best in this practice, and how do you communicate that very, very effectively in a short amount of time in what is sometimes a high stress situation, at least for the person learning?
Yep. Can I do one quick distinction?
Yep.
There's a distinction between teaching, which you've just used, I think, correctly in the skiing world, and I'd say learning in the working world that I'm in. So I wouldn't say that I do very much teaching or even very much training in that corporate world. What I would try and do there is create a place where we learn together.
Yeah, okay.
Because these people are super smart. You know, even the ones who are, have been on an excavator and then become a supervisor, there's all sorts of reasons why they're promoted to that role. And so I always want to start from, what do we each know and what can we learn from each other?
Would you call it almost not aided, but assisted problem solving?
Yep.
Almost in some situations, where you've got some knowledge and they've got some knowledge and it's coming together for shared understanding.
There we go.
That's a very Steve Jobs idea, actually, I believe.
But keep going with what you had.
Yeah, I think that assisted or shared learning or whatever environment is also going to happen in the skiing world. So I want to answer that question as directly as I can. A lot of life is about balance, and whether you're hitting a forehand top spin, drive down the line, as I watched my older brother do, maybe, you've got to be in balance to do that. And Lukey, we love cricket. When I see you step off the back foot and blade one through point for 4 or something like that,
the one time you've seen that,
you're in balance, right? And so with skiing there are some fundamentals, and part of that is helping people understand balance, right? And there's a few points, and in fact the training that I had when we were when I was teaching skiing was fantastic. I call it the progression. So there is a logical progression between standing on your skis, moving on them, and then moving on them effectively. And one of the things that we were taught and tested on was your ability to detect and correct. So you'd stand at the bottom of a hill, watch some people come down. You often do it on a chairlift. Okay, what would improve right there? And it might be their stance and balance. It might be their rotation skills. It might be their edging skills. And so you'd work through a list of those sorts of things. And for the person who we're not mentioning, blue skies and sunshine versus wind and fog makes a big difference. And then it's about what's the next step in that progression. So you're watching first of all for how they're standing on their skis and is their weight in the right place. If you're too far back, which is your tendency, particularly if there's a hill in front of you that you don't want to go down, you lean back a bit and that compounds a problem. It's actually a good analogy for life. Sometimes you've got to lean into difficult things. So getting your balance right and leaning into it. On the weekend when I was skiing, it came back to me. I was just sitting back a tiny bit on a reasonably steep pitch, and I found that joy again in throwing yourself downhill, and you know what I'm talking about, and ripping the edges. It was great. And I did all of this with you. You just happened to be 2 and 3 and 4 years old at the time, and you can't remember it.
Yep.
So yeah, watching and then knowing that certain things will help, and then just working on those one at a time. Yep, not trying to confuse it too much. Picking up on what they're naturally good at, and that person that we're not talking about has got good balance, agility, those sorts of things, because their previous world on a court taught them all of those things. So it's just applying that to standing on 2 metal-edged skis in hard plastic boots.
Yeah, that's good. What do you do for fun? Because you're not working. You are working a lot, but there's time that you have that's free time.
Yep.
What do you do for fun, Petey? I know, but...
Well, I still love the outdoors. And one of the things about it maybe not getting paid for that as my career, or that first part, is now just sharing that with people that I like, and whether that's family or friends or what have you. So I still love skiing. It's probably my number one outdoor pursuit that I enjoy. The body doesn't love these days sleeping on something that's hard. So the bushwalking I thoroughly enjoy, but I pay a price for it progressively the longer the walk is. I do have a mild addiction, and I'm blaming Ben, your younger brother, for my golf addiction. That's so when I was a kid, and this goes all the way back to holidays at Port Fairy. We spent about 10 or 15 years or whatever, 4 weeks at Port Fairy every year. That was, hook the caravan on, go down, and my uncle, my dad, my mum, a couple of the others would go out to the Port Fairy Golf Club and play golf, and I'd tag along as a little tacker. And my cousin Andy, that we talked about before, was a very good golfer. My uncle Paul was a good golfer, and my uncle David were all, solid golfers. And the rest of us were, that's when they'd play. The others would play really, And so I remember Crouchy, my cousin, giving me this 7-iron one day and saying, just follow me. And I hit this 7-iron off the tee. I hit it off the fairway, hit it around the greens, and I remember hitting it into the back of his head one day. I picked the ball up, and for whatever reason, we were walking off the green, and I just swung the club at it, and I actually hit the ball. I didn't think I'd hit it. I got him straight in the back of the head. He let me know what he thought about that. But then through high school years, I had a mate who liked playing golf, and we'd play golf together, and I really enjoyed it. But golf's one of those things where you say to others, I'll see you in 5 hours. And that's not great when there's 3 little kids at home and things like that. But at the tail end of COVID, Ben really sort of started taking interest in golf.
What sparked that?
In Benny?
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure, but Benny is 5 letters, Benny, and so is sport. You know, and I said that yesterday to someone. That's just him. He loves sport. Right?
He can play anything, can't he?
He's pretty good.
It's scary.
Yep. Well, all 3 of you, and Chelsea needs a mention here too. A quick digression. Chelsea's had chronic fatigue. She's into her 4th year of that, and she was able to. We were at Falls Creek for a few days in the school holidays, and she was able to get about an hour of skiing in each day. And I just watched her, and she skis technically so well. You know, there's just these 2 pencil lines as she heads down under Scott's chair there and just ripping it. Anyway, back to my passions. So good on you, Chelsea. The playing with Ben when he started getting into it reminded me that I really enjoyed it. And then, of course, with COVID, and my work involves a lot of travel, I wasn't able to travel. So in summer months, when we got daylight savings and things, particularly when school holidays were on, I'd just get up because I wake up early, and I'd be on the golf course at 6, and I'd be back home for brekkie at 8:30. And it's interesting because it's a technical sport, and I realise I enjoy cricket, skiing, golf, and they're all technical. So I think there's part of it in me that's a problem-solving thing. Why do I slice the ball and how do I fix that? I've got no idea. I'll work on that, you know, and then eventually you'll hit some sweet shot, you know, that'll either be a pitching shot that goes really close to the pin or a drive that's long or whatever, and you'll think, I just need to learn how to replicate that. You know, it's a good feeling. It's like, you know, turning at high speed on a pair of skis or just leaning on a ball and in cricket and finding that it's going further than if you try and hit it hard. You know, there's this piece in it. So technical but fun pursuits I enjoy. I like reading a book.
What are you reading at the minute? Or what have you read that you've loved?
What have I read that I've loved?
Atomic Habits.
That's a good question.
Chalk that up.
We've got to have a weekly plug for Atomic Habits.
Yep.
That's a good one. Well, there's maybe the most influential book in terms of, I'll go back a step. I love reading John Grisham books. I think I've read just
airport novels.
Yeah, I think I've read just about all of his. I like the way he writes. In my working world, there's a book called Leadership on the Line, and it's somewhere around here, and it talks about. There it is. There, Heifetz and Linsky. It's a great book. It talks about when you're asking people, when you're leading someone, you're often asking them to change, and people, you know, the premise of this is people don't like change. People will change if it's good. People don't like loss. And so then they talk about all of the challenges for leaders when you're asking someone to lose something by change. You know, even if what they're losing was bad and picking up something good. So that's, I think, in terms of leadership for me, I think it's hard to say. You know, there are 3,000 books each year roughly that are published on leadership. So to pick one out, you know, bit of a hard task. There's thousands of good ones out there, but that's a good one. Well, the book that sits beside my bed every day is the Bible, and
Get into that.
Yep, and that's important to me, and yep. So that would come first. Yeah, that's there you go. There's 3. There's one for kind of on a plane and chilling out. 1/14 of an Elephant I read during COVID.
That's what I was trying to remember that one.
Yep. Fantastic book about a prisoner of war on the prisoner of the Japanese building the Burma Railway, and Obi, who works with us, had talked about that book, and I got online and bought it right when Victoria was going through its second round of lockdowns, because there were a lot of people sort of complaining about how tough it was.
There were a lot of people that were complaining, I think.
Yeah, so there were a lot of people who were complaining, and I think rightly so. You know, life got interrupted, but I wanted to read something that gave me some perspective, and the hardships that those people went through, and in fact the lives that were lost were tragic, and those who survived had, some of them, luck on their side, others just incredible determination and resilience and what have you. So that, you know, I'll read at times to suit where I'm at, and to try and challenge myself around things like that. Yep.
You need to read the Bo Miles book when I'm finished with it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I love his podcasts and videos.
His videos are amazing.
Yep.
So I think with the faith thing, I don't really want to go just how has faith shaped your life, I guess. I would maybe, let's go with, what are some challenges that you've had throughout life, and how has your faith helped kind of guide you through challenges?
Or how has it influenced your mindset?
Yep.
Yeah, as well. Definitely.
So firstly, you know, people say you shouldn't talk about money, religion or politics, right? So to you two, well done I know it's part of what you want to explore in this, and I hope you get some people with lots of different perspectives. Secondly, I'm glad you're calling it faith and not religion. So my growing up and still today, Old English, you know, hitherto, thee, thy, thou, all that sort of, I hate all of that, because we don't speak like that in normal times, right? I couldn't, and I know people can. I don't like the candles, the you know, the collars, the suits, the robes, that sort of connotation around traditional religion. That doesn't sit well with me, and never has. But for me, and I very much respect those who think differently to me, but I'll just tell you how it is. I look at the world, I look at the fact, and I remember, you know, the day that you were born, Logie, and thinking that heart just beats by itself, and those eyes open and close, and you knew how to drink. Like all of that to me points to design. To others, and you know, I've got family member in our family who's a renowned scientist, who would say that is that's years and years and years of evolution, and you know, this thing figuring itself out. I respect that. I'm just telling you how I see the world. And so for me, if the design, the creator God, he's relational. So having a you know, relationship with him is important. And to come to your question, you know, about how's that played out in life, I think it's certainly and fundamentally played out in how I view relationships and marriage, in you know, that's, and family life. So if I think about that journey of my life, there's my initial family, and we still get on famously when we get together, and that's a testimony to mum and dad, and you know, the way that they brought us up, and there's 35 people from mum down in the family, so it's, you know, it's a good size, and probably growing with, you know, kids getting hooked up with others, married, and kids.
There's
and
2 great grandkids.
Yeah, that's right. And And then I think about the family Mandy and I started and then extended with the three of you. That sharing that faith with Mandy is fundamental to us sticking together and understanding, how we want to approach life. So there's lots of simple decisions that are made based on that.
I think everyone operates that way, regardless of what you believe to be effective, right?
Yeah.
Especially with someone that, you spend your whole life with.
Yep.
Good to share whatever your fundamentals are.
Yeah. And then along the way, that faith has been important in hard times. It was brutal when Crouchy died. That was probably, up until that point in my life, the most brutal time. He was a great mate, cousin, 5 or 6 years older, however it was, and just the life of a party. Fit, strong, and great fun. He would tell the funniest jokes, and he'd be the first one to laugh at them, of course, and all that sort of stuff. But understanding that, and he and I went to the Philippines and Hong Kong together. We played basketball over there, and talked about our faith. That was part of why we're there, and so I've got that memory of a month and a bit of just crazy times with him. Sitting on the top of jeepneys, driving through the Philippines, and I remember one day doing the Michael J. Fox thing from whatever movie it was, Teen Wolf, where he stood up on the roof, and we're literally travelling through the back blocks of the Philippines. We're on this jeepney, sitting on the top because that's where it was coolest, and I thought, this would be fun, I'll stand up. So I stood up on the top of this jeepney, and he was at the front looking forward, and he turned around, he saw me standing up kind of surfing this jeepney, and he screamed at me, he said, "Sit down, you idiot." It's got nothing to do with this. Anyway, he's a great mate, and losing him was really tough, but I know I'll see him again, and so that's a comfort. I lost my dad 10 years ago, just about 10 years ago. Similar thing. I remember going to see Dad in hospital. He'd been really sick and they couldn't figure out what it was. And a specialist found it. It was it was cancer where they didn't expect to find it. And he was saying things to Mum in the weeks before, like, I don't know if I'll get through tonight. I remember going in. I've been in Sydney for work, and I flew back, and there'd been a diagnosis on the day that I was up there for work, and my sister had let me know, and I flew in, and Dad and I had this time together. Everyone else left, and went home that night, and I stuck around until they'd gone, and there were just some things I wanted to talk to him about. And I remember him saying, I'm not fearful of dying. I know where I'm going. And I said to him, because I had said to him just before that, I'm not ready for this, Dad, I decided when he turned 70 in my head that I just wanted to treat him like a mate, not a dad. And so if I was doing something that was fun, if I was going to the footy, I was just going to invite him. And if we were going somewhere else, I'd just, Dad, do you want to do this? It changed my mindset. And so when I said I'm not ready, he was only 72 at the time. He's 71, actually, when he got the cancer. 72 when he died. He had 6 months. So I'd had in my head, I'd had these things that, we were going to do. It's partly why I enjoy playing golf or skiing with you kids, because you don't know how long you've got. You've just got to, make the most of those. There've been times when we've had more than we've needed. In fact, most of our married life, Mandy and I would say that we've, with some exceptions, some particularly tight times. So then I think your faith guides how you use your money and where you give and what you want to invest in outside of yourself. And then, I think for me, maybe it just helps you keep short accounts with people. I hope I'm quick to say sorry when I've done something stupid or wrong or selfish or whatever. And I can't think of a person that I have a grudge against. I don't think God wants us to burden ourselves with that. So maybe there's some different ways that I think it plays out.
Yeah. Well,
Awesome.
I wanted to take a different angle because you did go down the track of your relationship with your dad, especially when he hit 70.
Yep.
I think for me that sparked, in my mind, that sparked the idea of you and Luke and your relationship, because I've seen how you two interact, and you two interact like great mates. You say you started it when your dad turned 70. Well, Luke's probably been doing it since he was 12 years old, calling you Pete. But how did that relationship with your own father affect the way you now interact with Luke and Ben and Chelsea?
Yeah, it's interesting. Dad was an authoritarian when I was young. He, like I said, he was a primary teacher, but he served on local council for 25 years. So it was volunteer stuff. He would be on a school council meeting. He'd be involved at church, all sorts of things. So time poor, except for holidays. He was a different person on holidays. He had time, and there were no mobile phones. There was no email. He would go on holidays. He would totally relax. In fact, my enduring memory of my dad, one that I want to take to my grave, is Port Fairy, out beyond the breaking waves and just in the rollers, lying on his back, his arms out, his feet at the surface of the water, just going up and down as these rollers had come through, and just like that's total relaxation, right? But the other side of that, and I've got one that I'll take to my grave with me, is running between the kitchen and the lounge room, and I've done something wrong. I don't know what I'd done wrong, but as I'm running from him, bad idea, his left hand went under my left armpit, and he lifted me up, and I swung out, and as my feet swung back, his solid hand got my backside and gave me one of the, and he would dish it out. He was impatient. He was stressed, right?
Yeah.
But in his 50s, he's probably about my age or a little bit older. He had a few things that happened around him. And it was about the time that Mandy met me, and she talked about the old Alan and the new Alan. And most of that time, like there was only a short period of the old Alan. And I don't mean to paint him as, he was fantastic the whole way through, don't get me wrong. But, yeah, having grandkids changed him a lot, like mellowed him. Retiring, changing careers helped him. He had a doctor that told him to go and walk on the beach with the dog, because he did have some serious stress markers that were starting to show. And that's something that, that I've worked on to make sure that doesn't happen. There are times when I'll work really hard, but I'll just plan something that I can, get away from it.
Yeah.
But to get back to how does that influence my relationship with my kids, I love my mum and dad and the relationship I still have with mum. But I just want to start that early, and I've apologised to Luke many times for the first several years.
I needed it.
There was some.
Let's be honest.
If you don't learn from what happens before, you tend to repeat it, and so Luke got a few of the Alan Smith leftovers. But I also think, what's the outcome you actually want, And a fella by the name of Andy Stanley said that you win in parenting in as much as your adult kids want to spend time with you. And I reckon there are probably other things that would indicate whether you've done a good job parenting or not, but I'd like to think that all of us get along well individually, but we get along well collectively as well.
Yep.
And then also I think Mandy and I just enjoy creating memories. So we'll do things. We will retire with less money in our in our retirement funds because of things that we've done along the way.
Yeah.
We thought about, Mandy's brother lives in San Francisco, and we'd never done Christmas there. And we had this discussion one day. I had some frequent flyer points, and we go over to have Christmas with them. That turned into a 7-week break over there a few years back now. That included a lot of skiing. And I'm pretty happy to dream up ideas and things. And at some point, usually along the journey, Mandy's the voice of reason. And she sort of raised an eyebrow at one stage and said, how much is this going to cost? And I said, it'll probably just delay us paying the house off by a year. And she said, that's a good idea. Let's do it. And I remember talking to someone about that who said, no, Pete, pay the house off, then do it. And I thought, timing's just about everything, you know. And Luke, you were on that trip, and it was probably just the perfect time in your age that, you know, might be tricky to get you for 7 weeks now.
You can talk to my lecturers about it.
Yeah. So to me, it's investing.
Yeah.
You know, and some people wrap all their time and attention around investing money, and I would prefer to, I think, definitely invest in people, and particularly, you know, the 5 that are, or the other 4 that are most important to me.
Yeah. Well, that's funny you say investing, because on our way here, I was saying to Luke just as we were about to pull into the driveway, I love this podcast because it gives us an excuse to drive 2 hours, well, 1 hour each way to have a conversation with someone. But in a normal, I guess, a normal societal mind, you would say that's just ridiculous. But when you think about it, it's not. You can get so much more out of just a 1 hour conversation with someone than you would 4 hours of work and earning about $120. So I think that's a really good way of looking at it, in terms of, especially when you said putting your house loan off. Again, probably something people wouldn't normally go, oh, that's a great idea. Might raise their eyebrows a bit. But yeah, just that emphasis you put on those relationships around you is really inspiring. So yeah.
Yeah. It's, well, I look at people that don't.
Can you give us an example? No, I'm kidding.
Just, like, I'm very grateful for growing up the way that I did. But it kind of, the best part has just been, like, maybe it's just because post 13 is kind of good. Actually, high school is never fun for most people. But in terms of our relationship and my relationship with Mum, it's kind of like you two are my best mates. Like, I still take your advice quite frequently over advice of just a mate, probably, as parents. And I think there's merit in that.
It's interesting. I sometimes talk to people who have got young kids, and they fret teenage years. You know, oh, the kids in the teenage years. And we were never frightened of it. In fact, we looked forward to it. We reckon it's some of the best years growing up. And
except for with Ben, be scared. He's got a few more.
Yeah, no, he's every time I think he's just about done, he proves that he's not quite done yet.
He's better be done with his growing soon.
He's going to beat you, mate. He'll be taller.
He's almost taller now.
Yep.
Let's wrap up with, we're actually going to cover this with quite a few people, I think, that we've got lined up in terms of business building. I don't know that you might not call it that in your day to day, but you can't really, we can't not cover it really with what you've done. There's no doubt that building a business is very difficult, and I can kind of remember as a kid we had No Dad November a couple of years in a row when work really, really ramped up for you. And you had 4 or 5 weeks back to back of Sunday to Friday working. And then there's also times where, not really COVID, but there's the mining bust, that wasn't helpful.
Yep.
Had
a couple of those.
Yeah. So, what are, I guess we won't go with challenges, but what are sort of the pros and cons of, running your own business and navigating that yourself without someone else directly above you, basically?
Yeah. Well, I was born an optimist. For whatever reason, I take an optimistic view of things. And there are plenty of optimists that lose their house or lose their family, and I didn't want to be that. So I think that's where hard work and relationships and things like that come in. I think we're very fortunate. I was fortunate to have a mentor, a guy that I was subcontracted to for those years, to learn a lot from him and from others that were in a similar boat to me. So in some ways, particularly into mining, like if you went, knocked on the door of BHP and said, I've got something for you, thousands of people do that, and very few see the inside of the door. So in many ways, I'm fortunate that someone else had built some relationships to commence, or to start that. But maintaining those is a completely different thing, and doing a good job every time you go to work for someone is crucial. So the pros would be, I think over the journey, it's given me more flexibility than I had going to work every day. I mean, there's times where, a recent 21st that I wasn't able to go to because I was overseas for a couple of weeks with work. And Steph, I would have loved to have been there. That's Luke's girlfriend, Steph. And I would have loved to have been there. That wasn't possible. So that's a con, I guess. The cons are very much in the difficult times. There's no safety net. So we've had times where work has just completely stopped, and then you've got to figure out how you're going to feed the kids and do all those sorts of things. You're responsible for other people's welfare. So in the building company, as a director there, legally and morally responsible for anyone that walks onto your building sites. And I took that responsibility very seriously. And I hope that we had some practices that were more professional than maybe just the industry standard or what have you, because we talked about that and we thought about it and we put things in place. I think the pros for me outweigh the cons. One of the massive pros for me is the people that I've met, the relationships that I've got with people I would never have met otherwise, and then the opportunities to do things that wouldn't have come otherwise. And I think, I've just been incredibly fortunate with that. We don't advertise. All of our work is word of mouth, and we might suggest things that we see as a need and talk about ways that we think that we could help meet that. So that might be promoting certain things, but we don't spend any money at all, or time or energy on advertising as such.
Yep. Well, if there's a mining executive listening to this podcast, you've got an opportunity if you want to drop the name in. One of the 116.
I think probably the last thing that I'd just like to touch on, I guess some of our premise for this is...
you're a core of our inspiration, I'd say, in terms of there's four parents sitting above us. And
well, yeah, and going back to enjoying my upbringing, I think the biggest part is I do this now because it's just kind of drilled into me. is just blurt out little facts, not facts, bits of advice that I've accumulated or from something that I'm reading.
Yep.
And I think Chelsea mentioned it one night at dinner. I think it was when you're reading 1/14 of an elephant. She said, Dad, when you read a book, all of us read a book because we get to dinner and you just talk about it for 25 minutes, which is great.
Yep.
Well, my opinion, Chelsea, maybe not so much with that one in particular. Where am I going with this? Oh, yeah. So in terms of giving advice and passing that on to people, I think that's something that I've really learned from you. And I think that's kind of our premise for this podcast, is that the way that we've both kind of maybe grown up, the way that we've grown up and then what we've shifted to now, not living all the time with you, Pete, Mandy and Janita, is that we kind of want that more, and to be able to use that. And I think one of the biggest drivers for us was career. Well, at the moment is career, in terms of, doing what you love, doing something that fulfills you. And, I think it would be a different story for you if, the training was in something that you didn't see as much. I'm not saying that every day is rainbows and sunshine on a mine site, but if it was something that you didn't see some of the value in, like it's very high value getting it right. How many lives can we save?
The sad thing is, in our world, if we do a good job, you never know about it.
Yeah.
Right? We don't want to.
Yeah, you don't want to know about it.
That's right. Yep.
Yep. And if something goes wrong, you're there to fix it. But I think for us, career is this kind of driver in that, at least for me, well, actually for Luke and I, there's a lot of career paths out of our degree, and picking something that you love is important. Probably the last thing that I wanted to ask about was career and career shift from educating in the outdoors to
educating in the indoors underground.
Yeah, well, the way we've kind of talked about it in terms of the human connection stuff hasn't made it seem like there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference between it. And that career shift is difficult, and I don't know what the average is that they predict, but how many ever career shifts?
7 careers or something?
Yeah, something like 6 or 7 that we're all going to have by the time or at least our generation is going to have.
Yep.
How did you go about just managing that? And obviously we talked about, there's times where it's difficult, but were there very simple practices that you had with work that made it, obviously doing a good job gets you repeat work, but things like that made it stable enough? And maybe when it was more volatile, were there other things that you did to manage that?
Yep. So firstly, Mandy was awesome through the whole thing, and you kids, I reckon, had the best single mum in town for 30% of your life, or however, much of that time I was travelling.
Yep.
Secondly, we'd been fortunate before I did the switch to at least have built the house that we were in at the time and had a mortgage that was manageable. So I was 30 odd when you were born. So, fast forward 10 years and that's when I'm making decisions, from where you are now. And I had some part-time work that paid the mortgage and the bills, right? Electricity, blah, blah, blah. And that covered it. So our discussion was, I need to go and get petrol for the car and food for the table.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty simple target for the early days of work. That's all I was really targeting. We just need to, for a while, we just need to eat and be able to move. And when things kicked off, there was also then the management of cash flow. which was tricky because I was in a situation where I needed to prepay for flights, for accommodation, for car hire and things like that. And often after we'd outlaid all of that, we'd go and do the work, and I might not be paid for 30 or 60 days or whatever. In those 30 or 60 days, I'd be doing more work and accumulating more costs. And we had a credit card by then in our life, but we'd paid it off religiously. We never paid credit card interest, ever. And we'd been on a trip overseas, and somehow we'd increased the limit of the credit card in case we had a problem overseas, to a point where we said, we'd never ever use that, that much, because we couldn't pay it off if we did. But it was kind of like a security blanket thing when we were travelling. Well, we maxed that out in this journey, and the first month that the bill came in and we couldn't pay it, we just didn't have the money to pay it. I remember Mandy saying to me, "We don't do this." And I said, "Yes, but we're owed more than we owe. So this is for a period of time." So in that, it probably took about 9 months to get cash flow positive. And in that time, we had this enormous credit card bill, but always managing it by what was coming in or what was owed was always more. And I remember it was September of, pick the year, I don't know, 2004 or 2005, whatever it was, 2004 probably, when we got paid for these jobs, 3 or 4 jobs at a time. And back then, when we were subcontracting, the company would send us a check, and I held this check and I went, "There's the credit card done." And we've never paid credit card interest since. We've never had an overdraft. We've always maintained a reserve. And even during COVID, when COVID hit, and I just got back from Argentina at the time, I was doing some work over there, and all of a sudden the planes are grounded. And Mandy said, "What does this mean?" I said, naively, I thought it might be a 3 or a 6 month thing. I said, "It just means we'll get no cash for the next little while." And she said, "Well, what does that mean?" I said, "We'll just use up those reserves that are there, or try and maintain them as much as we can." So that transition time, I think you got to have the right, just to go back, you got to have the right people around you. You've got to be in or going into something that you can manage, and you've got to be aware very much, if you're going into business, you've got to be very much aware of cash flow, because it's different to profit.
Yeah. That's really interesting, actually, because I was listening to completely different business, but James Hoffman talk about Square Mile and how as a wholesaler, you just don't know when the cash is going to come in.
Yep.
That's the same with Nick Bear, who's got the supplement company in Austin. He was talking, he's a fitness guru, but has his own business. He did a 45-minute episode on, I think I just filmed it on his YouTube. He's like, you have to understand cash flow if you're going to go into any business, because he started with, I think he took out his army pension or army grant that you can get right at the start, which was $20,000.
Yep.
And he took it out and spent $20,000 on supplements. And he just said, righto, now I've got to make this money back and pay off this loan. And he said, even still, like, there's this cash flow, even however large you expand that business, because they're selling products wholesale as well. It's this, you have to be able to manage it. And it's not just, oh yeah, I've spent $3,000 and there's, that's going to net us $5,500. Like, it's so technical. And if you're not across it, you're looking at that credit card bill differently, aren't you?
Yeah, which is where the combination of the the finance study and the MBA really helped me. Like, I understood all of that, and then just to build some simple spreadsheets and things were helpful. we faced it again with the building company. I remember our first big project, and again we're going back 15 years or so, but I think the build was $800,000 or $900,000, and in the building industry, your margins are pretty narrow, just because the market's competitive, and the middle stage of that, where you lock the house up, is 35% of the contract. So 3 so maybe 3 9 27. We might have been high 200s, maybe $300,000 on this lock-up payment that was going to come from the clients. In that process, we had some delays because part of that is the roof, and it was just West Gippsland drizzle. So every time the plumbers went, they can't get on the roof because it's too dangerous. It's a pitched roof and steel. So there were these delays, these ongoing delays with the roof, which were all completely understandable. But we paid for the windows, we paid for the bricklayers, we paid for the insulation. Or maybe not the insulation at that stage. But these other things are just all going out, and it ticks over the end of the month where you're paying everything else. And I remember dipping into the Bank of Pete and Mandy during that time to the tune of over $100,000, and we had the redraw on our property. We just bring that into the the building company for maybe 5-6 weeks or whatever, until we finally sort of put that back. And if you're not in that position, then you could have this profitable venture that gets sunk because you don't have the cash to pay your people to come to work and keep the phone connected and all those sorts of things. So maintaining and managing that was crucial.
As boring as it is, be across your numbers.
Yep.
And I think seeing you and other people around you that are in the same sort of line of work with, actually not line of work, style of work with running your own business has, I think for the longest time, said to me, like one day that's what I want to do. And I think there's a lot of people, I certainly have a few mates that are similar. It's like there's this business drive that is kind of the fun stuff that I want to do. And being able to be across that so that it's as safe as possible, really, and as viable as possible is important.
Yep. And just be prepared for the possibility that something goes south. There was a restaurant in town here that changed hands just before COVID hit. The person that dropped the however many $1,000s in to buy the business to redo the shop fitting and all that sort of stuff then had 0 customers. One of the harsh realities that a lot of business owners saw in the last 2 years or so is that there are events that can wipe you out. Yeah. So you've got to be sort of at least mentally prepared to say, if I want to take on this venture, this could fail.
Yeah.
And conversely, the person that sold that restaurant had absolutely no clue that COVID was coming.
No, it was a January sale.
Yep. And they somehow got out in time. Yeah.
Yep.
So big ups and
lucky
downs
them.
potentially.
Yeah.
And I think that comes back to balance. Again, as someone that does economics at uni, like the most important thing is equilibrium. How close to can you get your business operation to a steady state, long run equilibrium that just sits there in the middle of your little profit and cost, or your revenue and cost graph.
Yep.
And how can you get life to look like that as well?
Well, I think so. Yeah. Yep. There's no point having the world and losing everything else. Yep.
Awesome. Well, I think that's probably... Have you got any other questions or queries or comments?
No, not really.
We're sick of you.
I think the advice you give everyone's really good. In terms of, you've given me advice in the past that's been really helpful. Especially, I'll go back to start of VCE year, you just said there's no guarantees. Take the challenge as it comes. And that was in the back of my mind throughout last year. So thank you for that. And I think the balance that you have in your own life is inspiring for others. So hopefully a lot of people will listen to this and, you know, see that there's more to life than just numbers. But while they're important, you know, the relationships around you are more so. So yeah. Thank you.
Just from my perspective, well done, you two. I would not have thought that I'd be sitting here being interviewed by you guys, and I think it's good you've taken on something that's going to contribute. There's a lot of stuff that goes on out there that doesn't add anything, and I think that you two are looking forward and checking in with people and asking these questions is a massive investment in yourselves. So, yeah, thanks for having me on.
That's right.
Good fun.
Thanks for being on.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Okay.
Cheers.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the podcast this week. We hope you've learned something valuable.
Follow along and connect with us on social media at Not Bad Better.
We'd love it if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts, either in the app or on their website if you don't have an iPhone.
Have a great week. We'll see you next time.